society. It affects everything from the distribution of wealth and resources to access to quality health care and education, from the empowerment of women and marginalized communities to the overall well-being of our dear nation. Thus, the theme of today's forum is a recognition that tax justice is tied to gender equality. Gender equality is not merely a matter of social justice. It is a prerequisite for sustainable and inclusive development. Fair taxation, on the other hand, serves as a cornerstone for any functioning society, finding essential public services that enable progress and prosperity for all. When these two forces, gender equality and fair taxation, converge, they create a powerful catalyst for positive change. As we launch our tax justice campaign today, we aim to unite a broader conversation and mobilize action towards reforming our tax system. We seek to build a society where every woman and man, regardless of their background or circumstances, can thrive and contribute to the betterment of their communities and our society. As we embark on this journey, let us remember that the success of this campaign is not solely measured by the policies we formulate or the initiatives we launch, but by the rare impact we achieve. Let us be guided by the belief that every action we take today is a step towards a more just, equitable, and prosperous future for all. Our collective effort is a multi-sectorial one, emphasizing the importance of collaboration across government bodies, civil society organizations, businesses, and academia. We firmly believe that only through such synergy can we forge a path towards a fairer, more just, and prosperous world for all. Today, we gather here as a diverse and passionate community, representing various sectors, backgrounds, and perspectives, united by a shared vision, a vision of a world where every individual, regardless of their gender, enjoys equal rights, opportunities, and benefits within a just and equitable tax system. Once again, I extend my warmest welcome to each one of you. Thank you for your commitment to this vital cause, for your dedication to advancing gender equality and fair taxation, and for your willingness to engage in this multi-sector forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. So let's give her another round of applause. Thank you very much, Patricia, for really underscoring the importance of this meeting. And for us as NETRIGHT, our interest is always about equity and also the promotion of gender equality. And I think we do have a track record as NETRIGHT in terms of making sure that every issue that concerns us as citizens of our various countries, because I know there are people in the virtual space who are joining in from other countries. Our interest is always to make sure that the issues of equity, the issue of rights, the issue of gender equality are underscored in the context of any issue that we deal with. And we have had experience in doing this over time. I think our core areas of work have been economic justice issues and also land rights issues. And in those areas, I think we have excelled because in the context of Ghana alone, we've been able to intervene in economic policy spaces and brought dimensions that have improved somehow the ways in which we look at economic policy and how women interface in those spaces. Recently, we've done work on COVID-19 and its gendered impacts and so on. And then the recent Land Act, we did a lot of work around that to make sure that the specific issues of concern to women were undertaken to ensure that the Land Act was a little bit gender responsive. We don't always get all the things we need, but that's why the struggle continues and we continue to do this work. I think also that we've even had some experience with looking at gender issues regarding taxes. In the early 2000s, we did some work in Dome Market, and it became very clear that the retailers were even being taxed much more than those who had shops, pharmacy shops and what have you. And these were very large shops, and yet the small traders in the market were being taxed the more. So these are the inequalities that we are talking about. So we talk about the justice element of taxation, and then embedded in that, how different people are taxed, for what purpose and for what use. So I think Patricia has underscored the very importance of this launch event. Thank you very much, Patricia. So we now call on our colleague, I think he's joining from Zambia. We are calling on him to speak on behalf of the Tax Justice Network of Africa. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. If at any point you can't, I'm sure you'll be able to. Yeah. Once again, my name is Zulu, and I'm representing the Tax Justice Network of Africa. Our executive director, Mr. Wayne, be a part of this particular meeting, but she's traveled to the US. So I was speaking on her behalf. And just to get started, for those of you that do not know who TJNA is, or Tax Justice Network. So Tax Justice Network is a network of civil society organizations that are promoting accountable and progressive tax systems. TJNA is one of the leading pan-African CSOs on the African continent that are promoting tax justice issues. And in today's context, the conversation of tax is quite important because any conversation that we may have, be it on funding education, be it on funding social protection, be it on funding health, whether we're trying to face and deal with the inequality issues that are inherent in our societies, we find that the key to these conversations is our tax system. Are we able to raise adequate resources from our tax system? How is the government channeling these resources that are raised from taxes to the different key social sectors? Hence the importance of the tax work that we do at Tax Justice Network Africa, and it speaks to the need for just tax systems. And hence the project that Patricia spoke about earlier on, the Scaling Up Tax Justice Project, the SCAT project, which we're working alongside NETRIGHT. And not just NETRIGHT, I think for all of us that are in the room here today, we are also a part of this journey that we're going on. And specifically to the issue of gender justice, connecting gender and tax. These are not things that you can speak to in isolation. If we're going to speak about gender, it's important to have a conversation on tax issues and link the two. Because many a time we find that our tax system, like was mentioned by the moderator just now, you would find that when you calculate in terms of proportion what women are paying in taxes as compared to men, you find that there is gender injustice in our tax systems. And slowly and more increasingly becoming a gender justice champion, because earlier on this year, I had a little daughter. She's 7 months old now. And I keep asking myself, do I want to raise my child in a society that is unjust, where she's going to be unfairly treated simply because of who she is as a woman? So I'm slowly and increasingly becoming a gender justice champion because I want to make a difference, not just for my daughter, but because there's several other people there that are marginalized. There's vulnerable groups that do not have a voice to speak for themselves. And I think we have a responsibility, each and every one of us, to play a role. Hence why I'm so happy to be working alongside NETRIGHT in launching this gender justice campaign. So I just want to thank each and every person that is a part of this meeting here today. A big thank you specifically to Patricia, who's leading the NETRIGHT team, for the work that has been done so far and the work that we're going to continue to do together over the duration of this particular project and even beyond this particular project. I am looking forward to collaborating with each and every one of you. So a big thank you to you all. I'll hand back over to the moderator at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ishmael from the Tax Justice Network Africa. I think that the continental nature of the project is very important, because then what it means is that we can learn from each other's countries, and then we can also build synergies around the advocacy strategies that we have together and so on. So thank you very much, Ishmael, for your support for the project and also for indicating how relevant it is for all of us. So we now move into the space where we are going to give solidarity messages. I think we all know that NETRIGHT is a network, and our relevance stands out in terms of the membership of the network. And so since we are moving into phase 3 of the project, we would want some of our members and also our partners and collaborators to kind of give some solidarity messages supporting the initiative and aligning themselves with it. So I'll call Beniani Ado, the National Coordinator, Tax Justice Coalition, to come and deliver his solidarity message. After him, we'll have Susanna Yete of FIDA, the Federation of Lawyers in Ghana. Then we'll have Beauty Emefanate, who is the Executive Director, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. Then we have Shamima Muslim of the Alliance of Women in Media, and then we have the Citizens Coalition. So in that order, thank you. So please come and speak to us, Benaya. Good, let's give him.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, members of the NETRIGHT project team, esteemed colleagues and fellow stakeholders. I am happy to stand before you today as a stakeholder in this groundbreaking project on advancing gender equality through fair taxation in pursuit of an inclusive and prosperous Ghana. This occasion marks a significant milestone in our collective journey towards a more just and equitable society. On behalf of the Tax Justice Coalition Ghana, I extend my warmest greetings and solidarity to NETRIGHT Ghana as we collectively work towards advancing gender equality through fair taxation in Ghana. This endeavor, rooted in the principles of justice and inclusion, is of paramount importance in our shared mission to foster sustainable and equitable development in our beloved nation. We recognize that achieving gender equality is not just a moral imperative, but also an economic necessity. Empowering women and addressing gender disparities have been shown to have a direct and positive impact on a country's economic growth, social stability, and overall development. We envisioned a Ghana where women and men enjoy economic opportunities and outcomes. Tax policies are fair and just, reducing gender disparities in income and wealth. Access to quality education and healthcare is available to all, irrespective of gender. Women are actively involved in decision-making processes at all levels. Ghana stands as a shining example of a nation where gender equality and inclusive development are at the forefront of public policy. The Tax Justice Coalition firmly believes that promoting gender equality through fair taxation requires a multisectoral approach, engaging key stakeholders from various sectors of society. This approach encompasses tax policy reform. We advocate for tax policies that recognize and rectify gender-based inequalities. This includes eliminating regressive taxes that disproportionately affect women, such as taxation on essential goods and services, and exploring progressive tax measures that consider the ability to pay. Social service and infrastructure. Adequate funding and provision of quality education, health, and infrastructure are essential components of gender equality. We call for increased investment in these sectors to reduce the burden on women who often bear the brunt of caregiving responsibilities. Financial inclusion. Empowering women economically is key to gender equality. We encourage policies that facilitate women access to financial services, credit, and entrepreneurial opportunities, along with measures to close the gender wage gap. Education and advocacy. Public awareness and education campaigns are vital to changing perceptions and attitudes regarding gender roles and economic participation. We pledge our commitment to ongoing advocacy and educational initiatives aimed at achieving gender equality through fair taxation. Fellow members gathered here, let us celebrate the launch of this transformative project as a testament to our unwavering commitment to equality and inclusive development. Let us embrace our role as stakeholders with enthusiasm and dedication, knowing that our collective effort can and will make a profound difference in the lives of millions of Ghanaians. The journey ahead may be challenging, but our solidarity, determination, and shared vision will lighten our path. Together, we build a Ghana that truly leaves no one behind. Thank you for your attention, and may this project be the beginning of a brighter, more equitable future for all.
I'm sure Fida would have spoken about the legal aspects of taxation and its implications for us as a country and also as a continent, especially in relation to the countries that are participating in the project. They would also have spoken about, they would also have spoken about the implications for us women, because that's where our specific interest comes in as NETRIGHT, and they would have committed to supporting the project to succeed because they are members of NETRIGHT. So even though they are not here, we know that they are with us in spirit. Thank you, Fida. Okay, so we now call on the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. Are they here? Are they here? Okay, so they would also have been interested in the ways in which the resources that we generate from taxation, the extent to which they are just and the extent to which they are used equitably and in a way that avoids corrupt practices. I think that we know that in our various countries, we are also challenged by corruption in terms of people who are in high places, and all of us actually. So I think the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition would really have underlined that point, whereby the emphasis would have been the ways in which the taxes are, the policies of taxation are skewed in favor of people with power, people who have more than the rest of us who are a little bit below the poverty line. So that would have been their interest, and the corruption element would have been highlighted. And so even though they are not here, when we are discussing, when we open the floor for discussion, we should try as much as possible to bring that dimension into it, in terms of how those who make policies for us use the resources equitably and to support us in realizing social, economic, and environmental and political interests that we have. So thank you, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, even though you are not, and I'm sure there are similar civil society groups in the countries that are part of this project, and therefore those sentiments echo in those countries as well. The Citizens Coalition, are you here? Are they here? No. Hey, I have a lot to stand in for. Okay, so we leave them out, and now we call on Shamima Muslim, because some of the issues that I have alluded to already would have been echoed by them. So Shamima, you have the floor.
Good morning once again. I bring you all warm greetings from the Alliance of Women in Media Africa. We are a coalition of female media professionals who are working towards increasing their own capacity to better represent themselves and advocate for greater representation of women in media, as well as their visibility and impact. But most importantly, we want to build a generation of women in media who are all more gender aware and who are bought into the gender agenda, and who would use their voices, their images, their stories to project the true representation of the issues women in our society and girls in our society face. We are hoping that over time we would have a new generation of women who would tell the correct and represent the images of African women and girls sufficiently and correctly. We're hoping also in time to be able to also encourage male allies and also have converts within the media industry with our male allies who would also become spokespersons for gender issues and use their platforms to project the right narratives on women and children and girls' issues. So that's why we exist. And we'd like to also use this opportunity to congratulate NETRIGHT for this very important initiative. I think taxation issues remain technical, and even for the media that covers these stories, there is a lot of capacity that is required. So we are hoping that as a result of this project, and I'm happy to hear Auntie Patricia mention that there is an intervention for media. I think that the success of this project will require deepening partnership and collaboration with Ghana's media, especially the women in media. I don't think that because we are talking about gender, we should always focus on women alone. I think we must also include the male journalists, especially some of the editors who are gatekeepers. Because if they are knowledgeable, if they are aware, I think that they will take the right editorial policies. So the two things we want to leave with the project, even as they begin this third phase, is to deepen collaboration and partnership with the media. Deepening collaboration and partnership means that we are more responsive to the media demands for information and knowledge rather than being reactive, that we see the media as collaborators and partners right from the get-go, and not just purveyors of news where you invite the media to come and cover and represent, because we want to use these opportunities to actually also educate. And the way we involve the media right from the beginnings of the project would help in deepening the media's own understanding and appreciation of the issues, so they can better project the right message that you want to deliver. It also means identifying the capacity gaps that exist within the media and ensuring that you support the media to bridge those capacity gaps in terms of providing the requisite knowledge and information as and when it is needed. It also means that building long-term relationships with media, especially media that you have identified to be aligned with the cause, who are interested, because Ghana's media is facing a crisis, just as civil society is also facing a crisis. The media is facing a crisis of relevance, and CSOs are also facing a crisis of relevance. A couple of weeks ago, we were in Abuja, and we at a conference, and the Vice President for Google News, Richard Greengrass, gave a very poignant speech about the reality of the media as exists today, and in the face of AI and internet, and the fact that 2% of all Google searches are not about serious news. And CSO is what? Serious business. And so for CSOs to remain relevant, as he charged media to also remain relevant, we must find ourselves in those spaces that people are conversing. And the social media platforms were mentioned. We must find ourselves in the TikToks, because that is where things are happening. So CSOs must be in the TikToks, providing correct and true information for the use of the public, just as media also needs to find themselves in those spaces. So I'd like to also leave you with that challenge. Find yourself in the spaces where the conversations are happening, if you are, especially to catch the young generation of today, who really are the future of these projects, who we would hope would be able to act differently and adopt the necessary behaviors we want to see, who tomorrow would be the duty bearer informed to take the right decision. So on that note, we'd like to say once again, congratulations on this project, and Alma is looking forward to working collaboratively with you in providing platforms to better increase awareness and visibility about the project, but also build our internal capacity to be able to report on tax issues and tax justice issues and gender equality more efficiently and effectively. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Shamima, who has spoken on behalf of the organization Alliance for Women in Media Africa. And I think that the name speaks for itself, and she made reference to what Patricia said about partnering with journalists. And this is, of course, a practice that has been firmly established within NETRIGHT, where we don't just call journalists to come and cover our events, but we see them as having indeed, if I can say, a duty, and also having an interest in the issues that are discussed from time to time. So in the same vein with this taxation project, we are going to make sure that we work with the media institutions, especially with the Alliance for Women in Media Africa, and working with also both women and men as journalists and media practitioners. So thank you very much, Shamima, for endorsing the project. I think at this point, we have our keynote speaker here. I think we all know him very well, Dr. Yao Graham, who heads the Third World Network Africa, who is known to have spoken quite extensively on this issue of tax justice. And so we are honored to have him speak to us today in order to give us some broad perspectives about the tax justice system in Africa and how this project then situates itself to become relevant for the tax system in Africa. So, yeah, without much ado, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good morning to all of you. And first of all, let me thank NETRIGHT for the invitation to make some remarks at the launch of the Gender Equality and Tax Justice Campaign, which is part of the Ghana component of the Scale Up Tax Justice Project, led by the Tax Justice Network Africa. Fair Network Africa is a founding member of NETRIGHT, and we deeply value our relationship and involvement with NETRIGHT. So we are quite pleased about this project, which marks the evolution of NETRIGHT's role, not only in the Ghanaian context, but in the wider African context. NETRIGHT, since its foundation, has been a valuable member of the group of organizations in Ghana working against injustice, for socioeconomic justice, rights, and the accountability of power. On the other side also, Fair Network Africa has had a long association with TJNA. So for us, it's doubly pleasing to see this link up between NETRIGHT and TJNA, with whom we have had a very long relationship. This project, of course, is the continuation of tax justice work in the Ghanaian context. And the Pan-African project, I think, is an opportunity for sharing, connecting beyond Ghana into the other 8 countries where the project is taking place. I've been asked to speak about the intersection of gender equality and tax justice in Ghana. It's a very big topic, but I'll just make a few remarks, to situate the project and some of the connections. Those remarks speak to 2 issues: the substantive issues of tax justice and gender equality, and also the issues of organization and campaigning, which I think are relevant for the success of any advocacy work. Now, I think the fundamental importance of gender equality and equity is recognized. It is not an issue of dispute. It is amazing to think that which is not to say that policy recognition in principle has resulted in transformation on the ground. I mean, there's this plenty evidence of the ways in which gender inequality and inequity remains rampant in Ghana. I mean, there have been studies that I'm sure many of you are aware of on property relations, including land relations, which give us a sharp picture of gender inequality. We have evidence of the gender pay gap, most recently disclosed by the Ghana Statistical Service study of the public sector. And of course, there are several reports about growing inequality of various types, which is not only a gender inequality issue, but fundamental inequality attributable to the remorseless, progress of neoliberalism. And so this discussion and the tax issue is a dimension of it, and I'll come to that. On the tax issue, I think it's important to situate the discussion about tax justice in a longer frame of reference, because the issue of tax justice as a campaigning issue and focus, as well as the issue of illicit financial flows, are fairly recent genealogy. But however, the substance of the issues that concern these two areas have been around, for a very long time. For example, in our own history in this country, during colonialism, there were riots against unfair taxation by the colonial state. Across Africa, part of the anti-colonial struggle involved people resisting unfair taxes by a colonial state which gave them very little but extracted a lot. So in that sense, the issue of tax justice is an aspect of economic justice, an aspect of people's sense of rights and dignity. And that strand, I think it's important to remember it also, that is an assertion of a certain kind of civic spirit and challenging power to be accountable. So all these dimensions, of course, are things that the women's movement, including NETRIGHT, has been associated with. And at a global level, I mean, the campaign, for example, against the unrestrained power of transnational corporations, their freedom to take money in and out of country, to be able to find ways of shifting earnings and so on, had become such a big concern that the UN in the 1970s had a UN Center on Transnational Corporations. And this issue, an important dimension of it actually had to do with tax justice, because it had to do with the taking of economic surplus out of our economies and not having those incomes available for the development of our countries on an equitable basis. So there's that genealogy, which, of course, has kind of crystallized in more recent times into the tax justice campaign. If we look back also to the effects of structural adjustment, one of the major effects of structural adjustment, of course, has been to dissolve the social compact. Neoliberalism has basically tried to reduce the responsibility of the state, and that reduction of the responsibility of the state is also about the reducing the levels of public spending on things which create equal opportunity, which are equitable. And to be able to account for that reduction, the issue of reducing taxes paid by businesses as well as the top levels of society was a very kind of key pillar. And when you think about it, one of the major issues actually which has had a consequence has been trade liberalization. Trade liberalization critically involved the removal of taxes on imports. And one effect, of course, was the destruction of local businesses, particularly the destruction of small enterprises, the destruction of work in the countryside. Now, people's ability to live depends very critically on their ability to earn a living. And tax policies which affect people's ability to earn a living critically are issues either of promoting one side or acting unjustly. And the tax policies that have been promoted under neoliberalism generally, particularly in the dramatic period of structural adjustment, was very highly unfavorable, not only in terms of the consequence of people's employment and also income generation, but also the effects on public revenue and the ability, therefore, of the state to allocate resources equitably. So in framing the tax justice conversation, I think we need this lens of history to see the continuities in how unjust tax policies, even though they were not framed as an attack on people, the result was that the consequences were the unjust tax policies had negative consequences on people's lives. So the crisis of our public revenue, critically, it's something that we need to situate in this conversation. And of course, once people, the effects on women in particular, these policies in terms of education, access to health, the ability of the whole effect on social reproduction, increased care burdens on women in the care economy may not appear immediately as tax issues, but in terms of the economic waves which are set forth by these policies, they are very strong, gendered, effects of those things. And in recent times, also in our own history, again, some of the protests against, increased VAT, against e-levy, and so on, speak to the fact that indirect taxes generally tend to be inequitable. Inequitable taxes tend to have a particularly heavy, impact on women and also the poorer sections of society. Now, those things were not framed in those moments as tax justice issues. But if you listen to the discourse, fundamentally, people were saying these taxes are not fair because they increase the cost of goods and services and will be inequitably, borne by sections of society. So, we in talking about gender equality and tax justice in this moment in our history, I think what I've spoken about in terms of that period of the past, there are two dimensions where I think we can bring forward here. Fundamentally, in talking about tax justice and gender equality, of course, we have to situate those conversations in the structure of the Ghanaian economy and society. Structurally, Ghana is a primary commodity export dependent economy, dominated by transnational corporations, dominated by foreign capital, and state policy has constantly sought to prioritize the interests of these sectors. Secondly, we must also situate this conversation today in the context of the fact that we are undergoing the worst economic crisis in the past 40 years of the country's history. These two issues, the systemic issue and the conjunctural reality of the debt crisis and the economic crisis, have to, in my view, bring some elements into how we see the definition of the tax justice and gender equality agenda in this moment. And I think not only the definition of the issue, but also in how we see alliances in terms of this work. I think it's quite important what the project is seeking to do, to raise awareness, to build alliances, to influence policy, and so on. The Scale Up Tax Justice campaign itself defines a thing about accountability and transparency, and also strengthening domestic resource mobilization, which presumably, of course, it's because the better domestic resource mobilization, more equitably used, will be beneficial for the state's capacity to provide goods and services will be enhanced. But we also know that one of the dimensions of this thing is that depending on who you are asking to pay the taxes, the sources of the taxes can be inequitable, and therefore inequitable consequences from the taxes. And also there's no guarantee that taxes, no matter how they are raised, will be equitably spent. So there's two sides to it, which is where I think in the work on tax justice, we should also remember the history of the women's movement and its work on gender budgeting. There's a connection here between the gender budgeting work of the past and tax justice and gender equality. So I think the lessons that we learned from that period should also be brought into this. The gender budgeting thing, of course, if you remember, was very focused on sources of revenue, and how it is spent with gender sensitivity. Those same issues are present in this tax justice work. But to go back to my thing about the primary commodity economy. Now, why is this important? Because the primary commodity economy, its pillars are agricultural and mineral raw material exports and dependence on manufactured imports. The virtual absence of a manufacturing sector and an economy which is not creating sustainable jobs. The inability to create sustainable jobs because of this character of the economy also means that we have a largely informalized economy. That informalization is a difficult terrain for individual taxation. A difficult terrain for individual taxation, both because just of the difficulty of tax collection and also because many people have infrequent, unpredictable income and also very low income. I raise this because a dimension of the tax justice work which makes the argument that people paying taxes allows them to have a greater claim on accountability by the state is important. And in more mature economies, these are centered on the fact that if you as an individual pay taxes, then you are more interested in how the monies are spent, which in principle ought to be true. But it's also possible, of course, that given the politics of this country and the dominance of a patronage culture, even if you are paying taxes and you are worried about it's being spent, like I was stuck in traffic, okay? Many people are stuck in traffic, they don't get water, you can't rely on electricity and so on. What you may get is not that somebody will remember that, I paid my taxes, but I'm not getting water. I pay my taxes and my road is bad, and therefore you should hold the people accountable. The reflex of many people could be, given our political culture, to say, oh, you know, this is our road. My wife goes to the same church with the MP's wife. So we'll send my wife to go and see the MP to see if they can come and fix our road. Now, that is not a civic intervention asking for accountability. It's a private lobby request falling on the mercy of the powerful. Now, the political consequence of that doesn't lead to accountability. It leads to citizens being beholden to those with power. Now, I raise this to say that that relationship was important in terms of taxation accountability. There's no guarantee that it flows. There's another dimension of that relationship. The huge dependence of this country on mineral and oil exports. In principle, according to the Constitution, these minerals are owned publicly and held in trust for all of us by the people in power. If we take the accountability logic, there should be a clear and continuous accountability to citizens for the quality of the contracts which are signed, to guarantee the optimum economic return and the minimum negative environmental and social externalities, and also accountability in how the money is spent. So I'm painting two scenarios here. The scenario of your individual taxation, the taxes you pay as personal tax or as VAT or whatever, and the accountability for that. The other side is the revenue that comes from publicly owned assets for which we are owed accountability. This is an important area of wasting assets for this country, which the taxation regime around it is unjust and inequitable for the citizens of this country, the owners. There's no accountability to us. The terms are not good for this country and not good for the citizens, and the returns are poor And therefore, the resources available from these mineral resources for development are not optimal. Just give you some, I mean, you all know about the work groups are doing on oil and gas and the revelations coming out and so on about what is happening there. We have the same thing in the mining sector. What I'm saying here is that in the discussion about tax justice in the Ghanaian context, these things are important because what are important economic issues are contextual. And in the Ghanaian context, the primary commodity export dependent economy has a substantial section of mineral and oil and gas production and export. And accountability for that, the quality of the tax regime is important in terms of equity and also potential public benefit, as is the transparency and accountability, which is the dimension of this campaign that is being launched. So the work of the parliamentary networks, the training of journalists and so on and so forth, I would argue that these are issues that could be of interest, and I think ought to be of interest. I know that NETRIGHT itself is involved in some of this work on extractives, and I'll come back to a dimension of that in a minute. And just to give some illustrations from the work that we have done, Thorough Network Africa have been working on extractives with other groups for more than 20 years. In a very quick succession, 2016 and 2018, the government decided in 2016 to basically reduce the taxes to be paid by large-scale gold mining companies. This was because the Kufuor government, the starting point of this, that the Kufuor government has signed a terrible deal with Newmont, which all the companies were clamoring for. So because of a terrible decision by one government, they destabilized the fiscal regime in the mining sector. And the government felt, wrongly, in my view, that they ought to reduce the terms rather than to seek over time to upscale the Newmont thing. So Goldfields were given a deal which reduced their taxes, which allowed them to lay off staff and to outsource everything. So the earning capacity of workers in the large-scale mines, their job security has been undermined. A consequence of that, actually, is their capacity as tax-paying citizens has been reduced because of the insecurity of work which has come with it. And the knock-on effect is also the quality of life for themselves and their families, just because of the dominance of these companies who are exploiting our resources. And with the aid of our politicians and technocrats, are forever extracting better and better terms, whilst we are getting worse and worse terms. There's a story of the gas deal that GNPC signed with Gensa, where they are paying for gas at a suboptimal price to generate power for the same mining companies. So we have this enclave, which is like a leech, sucking resources, okay? And if you look at other countries where at least their political leaders have recognized that these are non-renewable resources which should be optimized for society, we can see the differences in terms of the development benefits. Because what that leads to, that kind of choice, is that the non-renewable resources are put into a virtuous cycle of creating sustainable jobs which generate sustainable revenue sources, okay? And you move on to a different kind of scale, because revenue from extractives is not sustainable in the long term, because it will be exhausted. Hence, that virtuous circle of transition, I think it's quite important. And you see, the issue also about tax incentives, which is a big discussion in the tax justice work. In the Ghanaian context, it is the transnational corporations who get the best tax breaks. In 2018, when Anglo Gold Ashanti was about to rebuild its Obuasi mine, a mine which has been known for more than a century to one of the richest gold mines in the world, with 32 million proven ounces of reserves. the government projected that at the then existing rate of taxation, it will get about $320 million when the mine resumed production. The same government, however, offered tax breaks amounting to almost $275 million to a mine which was being revived with virtually no risk, which is the bulk of the tax income that would have come to the country, was being given back to the company. We went to Parliament, we fought it, it was reduced a little bit, but they got away with murder, literally. On the 6th of August, a newspaper called the Daily Maverick in South Africa published an article about how Obuasi is now the jewel in the crown of the Anglo Gold Ashanti Empire. Actually, the largest piece in that crown is the tax break that we gave away. So whilst it's a jewel in the crown of Ashanti, actually what we should have been getting from it was given back. So what this points to really is that we should be talking about the intersections of different campaigns when we come to talk about tax justice. Because all these things going on, particularly around extractives, raise important tax justice issues which affect the lives of ordinary people. So what is available to be invested? And then, of course, we have to get involved in how is it being invested. And a related issue, I think, which I want to draw attention to is that after the defeat of the government's attempt, basically to give away our mineral royalties to the JAPA scheme, the Mineral Income Investment Fund was restructured. So all the royalties now go to the MIF. Who is tracked? The MIF has become a self-regulating entity. Investing here, doing this and that. Now, if we are interested, the logic of what I'm saying is that the MIF is a very important revenue handling body whose spending has important implications for how our tax revenue is allocated. We should take an interest in it. It's under the radar. Today you hear that they are putting money in a lithium project. Tomorrow they are doing this. But when you go on their website, it's opaque. So I'm just trying to ground, as it were, the tax justice thing in our particular context. Let me make a quick thing about the debt crisis, and I think what we need to be paying attention to. As I said, we have the worst economic crisis in our history. There's an IMF program. There are all kinds of major decisions already taken and about to be taken with important tax justice implications. We know the normal package of IMF measures. Increased domestic resource mobilization. Now, Ghana's domestic resource mobilization has been suboptimal for a lower middle income country for a long time. Boosting domestic resource mobilization, it's important. Part of it is taxation of income. Part of it is property taxation. Some of it is wealth taxation. There are all kinds of measures. But unless the tax justice and gender equality, gender justice movement takes an interest in how policies to deal with the crisis are being designed, we might wake up to discover that we are working on the terrain where key decisions have already been taken. And this conjuncture, when you, in any moment when the IMF comes to town, citizens' alertness is important. Because the proposed measures are available, and I would suggest that it would be important for some work to as part of this, to begin to ask questions about the gender equality and tax justice implications of the part. Some people have done some work on it already, and I suspect that NETRIGHT could benefit from some of that, and also building alliances. Of course, the terms of the debt restructuring itself there are implications for the banking system and so on. So there may be consequences in their ability even to lend to small businesses and so on. And again, there are kind of knock-on effects. So the primary commodity economy as a systemic issue and the economic crisis as the conjuncture in which this campaign is being launched pose some important questions and raise some important challenges that I think should be of interest. I mean, it doesn't have to be across the board, but I just think it's important to be on alert, which is also why I pointed to the gender budgeting history, because in this moment, that history, I think, becomes very important, experience and legacy to tap into. Finally, I mean, from what I've said, it is clear that there are junctions to be made with existing campaigns and activities. I spoke about NETRIGHT's own work around extractives. Let me just take that as a very concrete example of the extractives thing. A couple of weeks ago, the president went to Adan to launch the new equipment and blah, 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 the electrochem salt works. And celebrated as a Ghanaian entrepreneur, who should be supported and so on and so forth. Inside that story is a story of gender injustice and also tax injustice. Let me explain. The alternative model of development of the Sonko Lagoon, which was on the table, developed as government policy 30 years ago, does not involve giving the lagoon to one person. It involves developing the lagoon as an economic zone where small-scale salt winners, cooperative salt winners, large-scale salt producers can exist at the primary production level to feed processors, refiners, chemical industry, and so on and so forth. And in that level of the producers, women have been very important source, important constituency in salt production. And in one of the poorest parts of the country, that model would have created tens of thousands of jobs for self-employed people, as well as small businesses who have relationships with bigger companies, generate income for themselves, to be able to support their families, and also be tax-paying citizens. As it is now, the dispossession of everybody has concentrated economic power in the hands of one firm and is generating conflict, which means the economic multiplier possibilities of the alternative has been put aside. A lot of women who could have been earning an income have been marginalized, and the effect, the burden, the effect on the wider society there is quite profound. And because that is usually the case, you find that the agreement provides tax breaks for the big firm. I mean, there will be all kinds of public money spent to support the kind of infrastructure and other requirements of the firm. Now, if you look at it, if you make a big thing about the national interest without disaggregating it, you can talk about how Ghana's salt potential is being exploited. But there's nothing simple like that. It's like when we talk about gold production, there's very little discussion about the negative externalities of large scale. There's a lot of discussion about small scale, to the point where even legal small-scale gold miners in this country have come to be conflated with galamsey. So the big-small, distinction and the preference to support large-scale, as opposed to starting the reality of the fact that in many areas of our economic activities, small and medium scale, which is dominant, is a problem. And the Adan Songo area, where I know NETRIGHT has done some research, is very illustrative of how the government's notion that large scale, which you pay direct royalty to government, is preferable. That model, its consequences its implications are unjust and its consequences are unjust, both in terms of potential, income, livelihoods, stability, and so on and so forth. So the junction point I'm making here is that I can see a junction, therefore, between the work of this project with groups working on extractives, with groups working on debt, with groups working on employment. I'm glad that trade unions are here, and also, of course, people working on social policy. We could go on and list things, but that would be kind of too ambitious. But these are just kind of illustrative of the kind of relationships which are thrown up by the economic reality and the conjuncture that we are in. And of course, the illicit financial flows are very heavily implicated in the extractive sector and the work of transnational corporations. And I think what it points to ultimately is that the tax justice work increasingly has been recognized, the illicit financial flows issue, as an aspect really of the amount of resources that leak out of the African continent because of the regimes under which transnational corporations operate. So the Tax Justice Network Africa is part of a coalition called the Stop the Bleeding campaign, which involves groups working on debt, groups working on trade, and so on and so forth. And I hope that those relationships at the Pan-African level become part of the ways in which NETRIGHT sees its work. And if we also remember what I said about the importance of trade and investment regimes, this is work which has been ongoing, in this country, involving groups like Third World Network Africa and so on. I think it's something that these are some of the relationships that we should be looking at, even though I recognize that there's a core project for the campaign. But effective campaigning means that you have your particular focus, but if you have a wider strategic lens, you're able to benefit, from the energies and knowledge of other groups, in addition to the specific things that you want to work on. So good luck, NETRIGHT, with the campaign, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Yao, for that very insightful keynote speech that you have given, which has actually broadened our scope of understanding of the project that is before us. I think that I can just say that what you have offered us is really about how we frame our reference point for embarking on this journey, which so many other groups and organizations have been involved in from different dimensions. I think the historical background was very important, telling us about how agitation and campaigning have really formed the basis of where we are now, from the colonial period up until now. And in terms of the different dimensions of the tax issue, the tax justice issue, referencing economic justice issues relating to how we make decisions, the lack of accountability of government, the gaps in our own organizing, and how we can broaden the scope of our organizing to make it much more Pan-African in nature, so that in our mobilization, in our actions on promoting gender equality and equity, we can be much more broad in our scope of reference. So thank you very much. I don't think there's any need to summarize. I think we have all been informed adequately about how we need to look at this project in its broadest sense, so that we bring in different elements, especially regarding the tax regime, the inequities involved, and how much of our taxes are actually taken outside our country because of bad policy and because of the politics of our times and the crisis we find ourselves. So I think I will thank you once again, and I hope that as we move into the next session, we will be informed by some of the critical points that were raised in Dr. Graham's presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Graham. I think before we go on snack break, I would like to call on Patricia Akakpo, the head of NETRIGHT, to explain a little bit to us how we are proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosemesa Kutin. Before we proceed, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Graham and TWN Africa for hosting NETRIGHT for the past 21 years. And aside hosting us, they've consciously set out to ensure that NETRIGHT participate in a lot of programs. And this tax justice campaign is one of the opportunities that they've provided NETRIGHT. So we use their relationship with Tax Justice Network Africa to be able to get on. I wouldn't say we use it, rather they use their relationship with Tax Justice Network Africa to get us involved in this project. And we are very grateful, because that is also giving the whole campaign another dimension of looking at the campaign from a gender lens. And we are grateful. And this is not the only opportunity. The extractives that he spoke about is, NETRIGHT is part of it because of the leverage, because of the relationship that we have with Third World Network. Actually, NETRIGHT was birthed by TWN Africa because it was through a study in 2000. Before 2099, it was through a study on women machineries that TW African led that birthed NETRIGHT, and that has provided a national women's rights network, a national platform that is growing from strength to strength. So we are so grateful to Dr. Graham and Third World Africa. Now we've got to the stage where we'll have a discussion after snack break, but then we'll want to do an official launching of our campaign. So please, I want Dr. Graham and Auntie Rose to join me. We have our steering committee member here. Pauline, please join us. And then they will do the Cynthia, please. I don't know. Now it's Cynthia that will lead us to do the curtain. Where is Cynthia? She's not on. Okay. She's the one that did this thing. So should I give? So we'll cut the tape too. The person that arranged it is not here, and I don't know what to. Who do I give to you? So we'll go and cut the tape to signify that the campaign has been launched. Okay. Then after that, we'll have a snack break. Please, we'll break for snack and then come back. Thank you. And yes, African medallion. Thai justice. balance. It's the address your tax system, they will benefit both women and men. And resources are mobilizing country and near mobilizing resources now. Butai or where so it's for instance, if we are in this age and time, we still have a map of what normally we still have children studying under trees near into the versions of resources. We cannot hear two taxes now here. We can fast over as a country. And marginal taxes more than environment. And I said tax regime that is it equitable. It's a nothing yeah, launching campaign yeah, share illicit financial flows. The case illicit financial flows. The plan for fast food free system. We do our tax havens, abiding creating tax holidays or different big companies at the expense of your local businesses now. How is it impacting on the development? There are 3 years. In 3 years, yeah, strengthen civil society on tax justice issues. And one more training perform on my tax justice champions. Now, they are signed so after a journalist, they're interested in tax justice. But for young people, so we're interested in gender tax justice issues, but then we do it from the gender angle. Because it's important because through the project, through the campaign, they training journalists, they were training journalists and follow tax issues, and as our tax regime, we do it from a gender perspective. There are a lot of multi-stakeholder forums to discuss issues around illicit financial flow, around domestic resource mobilization. Now, the parliament should be because it's also about policies, it's also about laws. Going to meet now, I said, the parliament, we are not legislative. The parliament should be after time and Patricia Blackson and Campbell make a deal and try to So our program today is a multi-sector forum and the launching of our tax justice campaign. NETRIGHT, in collaboration with the Tax Justice African Network, is implementing the Scaling Up Tax Justice project. The project is in phase 3. NETRIGHT joined the phase 3. They've already started. It's being implemented in 9 African countries. I hope I'll be able to remember. So Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, Tunisia, Senegal, Sierra Leone. I'm not sure I'll be able to remember all. And for NETRIGHT, we are interested in this project because we are going to look at it from a gender perspective. We are looking at domestic resource mobilization. We are looking at illicit financial flows. And we are looking at the whole tax regime and how it benefits both women and men. And whether resources that we mobilize as a country is used judiciously. So we are going to look at accountability issues and transparency issues. And I did mention that for this age and time in our life, we still have women going to give birth and then they lose their children. And infant mortality is high. We need to look at that because if we are mobilizing resources, then resources should go into the development law has been put out already, and it's looking at the tax regime in its totality from a gender perspective. The second study will be informed based on the emerging issues that will come out during the campaign. We intend to produce policy briefs and other advocacy materials that will inform our advocacy. There is a component of building the capacity of CSOs to be tax champions across the country. We also intend to engage with journalists and also train some journalists that are interested not only in tax issues but from a gender perspective. Yeah, so within this 3 year period, this has our process. That's why today we are here to launch the campaign. It's not a new campaign. It's part of the broader campaign of Stop the Bleeding, and it's part of the broader campaign by TJNA, Tax Justice African Network. And as I mentioned, this is the phase 3. So it's something that has happened and Ghana is joining. You're welcome.
Hello, everybody. Well, I know you haven't finished taking your snacks, but before we move into the next session, I think we need to digest a little bit the presentation that has been made by Dr. Yao Graham. And this is how we are going to do it. I think each table should have a little discussion of, let's say, 5 minutes. and then you come up with one issue that stood out for you. Are we together? Hello? Are we together? So that at least we harvest the knowledge that has been shared with us today. So every table have a discussion of about 5 minutes, then you get somebody to crystallize your discussion and point to one issue that stood out for you as a group, so that we can use that as we are framing the model for implementation of the project. Is that okay with us? Hello? Hi. So that's the task ahead of us. Yes. Have a discussion, 5 minutes, about what you heard in the keynote, and then when the 5 minutes is over, we go around each table. You just mention the one thing that stood out for you in terms of the project and its framing. Thank you very much. Shamima. It's time for you to take charge.
apparently our 5 minutes is up. So 1 minute to wrap up. 1 minute to wrap up. Okay, so which table will go first? Hello? Hello? Hey, I can't hear you. All just echo. Hello? Please, which table will go first? Are you, so here is fine. Summary of what the conversation. No problem.
I won't misheavy. Okay, so on this table we had three. Okay, so we had 3 of the bulleted points that we had discussed. So one of the issues that stood out for us was the fact that the concepts that were presented were practical. So they were very grounded. We could attribute them to some of the things that the network were doing so that we could collaborate on same. So we looked at trade, we looked at debt, and even the extractives. So what about trade?
Much about trade by anybody on the table.
We need to break down the topic so we really understand what we mean by
Well, on trade, we thought on issues of reliefs, tax reliefs, we thought especially where women who are in business and they are single parents, we thought they could be given certain reliefs for actually holding the front. And I also looked at the removal of taxes. We thought when it came to the utilization of the resources, the tax resources, gender, we looked at menstrual parts, removing taxes from menstrual parts. We thought it was very important. And still on utilization, when it comes to the issues of education, specifically we look at women when it comes to the washrooms. It's a general thing for men and boys and girls. But if you could have changing rooms as well for girls, you know, especially when you have a smoking room for, you know, adults in work environment, we thought it should be some provision that we should get doing with participation. We thought women participation is very important, getting the right information to the women's groups and getting to the, for example, if you go to the markets where the majority of the women will be found and doing good work over there, we thought, you know, you should get their inputs when you are having tax policies. And so we thought it's important to have women to participate.
I think the final thing we talked about was the fact that the presentation identified already existing structures which could be beneficial to the project, and I thought that was brilliant because if we know where to go to, it helps us build on what we are doing, and it also gives you the support systems within which your advocacy could pick up. And when he mentioned the various thematic issues as well, which she mentioned earlier, that is also critical for any project to build on. If we do not know where to go to collaborate, and we have, for instance, in Parliament, we know the structures in there, you just go and engage with, and you build on what is existing, because there is nothing that is new under the earth anyway, and so it's for us to identify these spaces and see how we can then infiltrate the spaces with our agenda to ensure that each and every space is reflecting what we are doing. Thank you.
Let's give them a round of applause. That was helpful, not so? So what are some of the other thematic areas that were mentioned? You can shout from your table. Trade, employment, extractive sector. Yes. Then the stakeholders, who are they? Just shout from your table. Who might be some of the stakeholders? Media, trade unions, Parliament has been mentioned already. Civil society organizations who are already doing work in that regard. Yes, this table. Why are you passing on? No, because we agreed.
It was agreed that I will introduce our speaker. Great. So our one issue was the intersectionalities that the speaker mentioned. And there were three things that came out of that. One was that our table feels that in the intersectionality analysis, there should be equal emphasis or more emphasis on the gender dimensions. And then there was a point about the importance of considering the different classes of women in the gender analysis, because there may be women in the informal sector, for instance, who are impacted differently from women in the upper class. So there was the point that it will be important to look at all those categories of women and how this impacts them and factor that into the project. And the final point was about the importance of linking the campaign to the other intersections. So it may not necessarily be gender focused, but there may be wider issues that have serious implications, for instance. Yes, so it will be important for us to look at those links and make those links. Okay, so for instance, there was recently, the most recent example is there was a campaign on kind of a protest against tax on sanitary pads, and I saw people participating. So that is something that a lot of people will identify with. But if, for instance, there is another issue, campaign against corruption, for instance, it may not necessarily be, okay, let's go and protest against people who steal money that is meant for sanitary pads. But the wider issue of corruption is directly linked to the specific gender issue. So we shouldn't only respond when it's gender specific or sanitary pads, but we should also recognize the connection with the bigger issues that sometimes even have more serious implications for the demographics that we are concerned about.
Thank you very much. A round of applause. Next. 2 man strong, 2 woman strong. said I should go and come. Should I go and come? Yes. Okay. No, but every table has to speak, so okay. So I'll go and come. Right. Oh, and baby, I can say morning. Just share what you discussed. Or even if you still have questions, please. Exactly. Even if you have any clarifications, if you have questions, I think that's right.
You can also go and come.
No, really, there's no time. Okay, pass. Okay, all right.
I just want to briefly comment on a point that was made on the second table, actually, regarding making sure that the projects are specific to, as in we delineate the individual women groups that these things potentially impact. I'm from Women in Mining Ghana, and in the industry we have the ASM women who are like in the more informal sector, and then we have women in the formal mining sector, and their challenges are different. And so if we lump them together, the solutions might not help for the ASM woman or for the mining woman in the formal sector. So I actually support the suggestion that they brought, that if we can delineate that, make it more specific to different women groups so that we don't lump all of them together, because okay, so things like the sanitary pad issues, when we go to some of the ASM sites where women are not, artisanal small-scale mining, women are not even allowed to come into the mine when they are like in their time of the month, because it's believed the gold will stop coming and all those things. And these are things that affect these women because that's their source of livelihood. So some of these things, and if there's a way for us to provide for them so they don't have to face some of these issues, which is a totally different scenario for the women in the formal sector. They are not experiencing like this particular scenario. So these are some of the issues that...
Thank you very much. Okay, coming to my table.
Okay, so my table first pointed out that it's important to pay attention to the context of the problem. So specifically looking at how we can clarify the subject matter and being able to break it down to the layman so that people can really understand what the problem is. Because once people can understand specifically how women are disadvantaged when it comes to the taxation system, that way more people can get on board in rallying and moving things forward so that policy can be changed, because it's not just the responsibility of the CSOs and other groups, but also the masses, which is, you know, everyone, as well as the government. So we're hoping that moving forward in NETRIGHT's communication and campaigning, there can be a lot of emphasis on really breaking it down to everyone to understand through social media and other platforms, so people can really understand the different examples and stories of how women have been impacted and continue to be impacted by this taxation problem. Also, for me personally, what really stood out to me was Ms. Shamima's remarks on making sure that CSOs remain relevant in, you know, in Ghana, especially with being more visible on social media and all these other things. A lot of the times, there are a lot of CSOs that are run by the older generation, and sometimes there isn't that openness to increasing visibility on social media. I have run into that challenge working at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. I think the African Center for Economic Transformation, which I worked at before, they do a really good job on social media. And so I think it's important to look to organizations like this who really try to create visibility, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, because I think that's the future. And that way we can appeal to Generation Z and, you know, the younger millennials, because that way we're able to spread the message that we want to, you know, share to the world. And also, Ms. Shamima talked about how recently she found out about the gender pay gap being about 34.2% less than men, you know, in Ghana, and that's extremely alarming, you know. And so even on this scale, in the formal sector, women are earning significantly less. And what does this mean for, you know, taxation as well? What does this mean for how much they're taking home, their disposable income? So all these issues are very concerning, not just in the informal sector where there are a lot of female entrepreneurs, but also in the formal sector where a lot of us find ourselves. And what does that mean for the future for us? So that's sort of what we talked about. Yeah.
Round of applause. Andrews, I'm coming back to your table. Maybe some of the things that have come up, do you think there's a deeper understanding, you know, if you compare to the message you try to communicate? Are there some issues you want to draw attention to as most critical, you know, issues to be minded about?
I mean, listening to the what has come before, I think what it highlights is that there are a variety of issues of substance as well as method. For example, I mean, in campaigning, you want to interest as many people as possible and to get them to be talking about what you are doing. And we know that if things are kind of dry and abstract, it's difficult. So I think the points made about messaging, targeting different groups, the media through which different people get their information, I think it's critical, whatever the substance of what they are doing is. And also the thing about, say, the differentiation, different people being, you know, affected by this, you know, affected in different ways by the same issue. I think what it highlights, I mean, to go to Mauli's point, the basically requires that constantly to remember that, I mean, gender disaggregation, gender analysis, is one dimension of analyzing social relations, which have class, in our country, ethnicity and religion, urban, rural, and age. So I think those are important issues in addition to what I said. I was focusing really on the substantive things about the tax terrain, and I think all these dimensions are important.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Round of applause. You are ready now. Let's give them some vim. Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll also tackle how media portray gender. You know, media, we educate, we entertain, we also inform. But currently, when you see what media we put out there, especially with our advertisements, you see a lot of, I always analyze any advertisement I see on the road. Sometimes you see how women are portrayed. You see only women are, assuming if it's a Tim Tomatoes advert, it's a woman's image which is there. If you see alcohol, even television adverts, how women are dressed, most of them are even half naked. So when it comes to that, you see when they are going for job application, they don't even look at their capabilities or what they can also offer to the job. They only look at how they can perform, their body stature, how they look, their beauty and everything. They don't look at their capability or what they can also give into the organization. They only look at that sexual objective
they have given to them. So I think going forward, the media should do better rather than giving the society some picture about gender, about women. We should educate more that we can do more. We shouldn't let them feel that this is what they have to use their body for sexual activities, but then they can also do much with their capabilities, their intelligence, and other things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Give you another round of applause. But I think that also just means that, yes, I'm coming back to you. The Ghana Advertisers Association must also be a key stakeholder in these conversations. Auntie Rose.
Thank you very much, Shamima. You have done a good job, and we want to clap for ourselves. Okay, so at this point, I think we would like to call on Mary Awila Ada, who is the Executive Director of Ghana Integrity Initiative. She's going to make a presentation to us on the linkages and understandings of gender equality, tax justice, and inclusive development. And I think this is important because GII has actually done some substantive work on tax justice issues. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Auntie Rose. Thank you to the NETRIGHT fraternity for inviting us to this program. Please pardon my very hoarse voice. In fact, it is better today. I nearly bailed out on this because it was terrible yesterday. It's not a flu, but I don't know what's happening to me. So feel free to interact with me. Thank you. This topic is one that is very important, and I believe after listening to Dr. Yao Graham, who eloquently presented the nuances of the taxation issue, navigating from theory into practice, I believe we could have easily left this part of the presentation, but let's add on. Anyway, so we are looking at unlocking sustainable development, linkages between gender equality, tax justice, and inclusive development. So our world is currently grappling with the unprecedented levels of economic inequality. There are also gaps that continue to exist between the rich and the poor. The UN has alluded to the fact that millions of marginalized people continue to suffer injustices when it comes to particularly the issues around gender and how men and women are treated. The divide, even though a lot of work has gone on, has not been bridged as we would have wanted it after the many years of advocacy to ensure that we are bringing women on board and we are closing those spaces when it comes to their economic rights and participation in the issues of governance. So taxation is not merely, when we talk about the fiscal policy space, but a tool for resource allocation. Fair taxation is essential to fund critical public services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. It is also fundamental to ensuring that we bridge the gap when it comes to our development, particularly when we want to talk about the subject matter of inclusion. We have made several international commitments, and some of those have been spoken about this morning, which expect the country to ensure that we do a lot of things in our policy and also legislative spaces to bridge these gaps and then also find a way of linking the three issues under contention this morning. So when we talk about gender equality, excuse me to speak to this, it would be like preaching to the converted, but just to say a few words before we proceed. So, referencing this subject matter of gender equality, we are talking about equal rights, as we heard this morning, responsibilities and opportunities to all individuals, regardless of their gender. Whether I'm a woman or a man, whether I come from the north or south, whether I'm a Christian or a Muslim. So far as I'm a woman and a man, we should be treated equality, granted those opportunities which encompass female sex, let me say. So some key aspects we should be discussing or looking at in this context would include equal access to education, equal access to healthcare, which are constitutionally enshrined in our case. So, for example, if I'm a woman, I should be given the same opportunities like a man if I want to be in a decision-making space. If I have the right education, I have the capacity like we all know we do. So, then we talk about tax justice, which Dr. Graham has spoken to. I just wanted to bring in the element that involves the fact that people who are paid, be it on an individual space or a corporate space, that is done in a very fair manner. And this morning we all heard that when you talk about pay, in Ghana there is some sort of discrimination from what the Statistical Service presented just, I think about Friday or Thursday last week. This should not be the case, and I believe it's not a Ghanaian problem. Even in the US until recently, they had those discriminations and they still are existing. Unfortunately, we shouldn't have, but that is what we have. So our campaign should as well pay attention to this. When Dr. Mensah Kutin mentioned that GRI engaged or implemented a project similar to this, we were part of SCAT 1, and so we understand the issues around tax justice. We were dealing with domestic resource mobilization. We're also dealing with DTRs. DTR's resource mobilization, we dealt with the double tax agreements that were signed between Ghana and other nations, and that's another area where in the international arena we are not treated fairly. And as a country, when we look at this, we look at the examples that affect women, because in all these discussions and negotiations, mostly women are not part of the space. And so progressive taxation, where the wealthy pay a higher percentage of their income taxes, which we mentioned on our table. We're talking about elimination of taxes and issues around avoidance. We looked at fair distribution of tax burdens to prevent undue hardship to the vulnerable populations. And then again, you see that in Ghana, we looked at the issue around welfare and social protection. This is an arena where the issue of gender differentials are being paid attention to in some way, because we see that the households that are captured in particularly the LEAP, and also when you talk about indigents, we see that public policy is paying attention to the poor and those who are excluded. So we believe that these are some of the issues we should be paying attention to when we are talking about tax justice. And we should look at how fair these processes are. We have also engaged to look at how corruption in the distribution or the redistribution of our taxes to the poor are affecting the proper implementation of some of these policies, which are supposed to be catering to some of the challenges we have mentioned. How do we also check the loopholes that allow for multinational corporations to shift profits from low-income countries or low-tax jurisdictions into their jurisdictions? Doug mentioned the issue of Obuasi Gold and how they have taken Ghana for a ride and shortchanged us. When we talk about the issue of inclusion, we looked at it from a point of view of the improving the well-being of the vulnerable individual, particularly those who are marginalized in our communities. We are not talking about just gender, talking about people living with disabilities, and ensuring that these people have free access or access, equal access and benefits to the economic, social, and political opportunities that are bound for our people. So how do we reduce the poverty and inequality gaps? And if we are referencing this, we also look at SDG 10, which presents several targets, particularly on how we should do this. And I see Levelyn seated here. The SDGs also promotes an opportunity where many of them, when you look at 5 and the various targets, it also speaks to how, as a project, we can also deal with the issues around promoting tax justice and inclusive development. We see the issues around the environment, and here again, we then look at how taxation affects women and men, and particularly rural women in this case, where we have looked at, and it's not a good picture. Auntie Rose sitting here has done a lot of extensive work around climate change, which again is another subject matter the SDGs is paying attention to. Myself and Pat were in New York recently to attend the SDG annual program, and you realize that from the analysis we hear only 13% of the goals have been achieved. So it means at this point, where we are going to 2030, we are already in 2023. If we have just 13% of the goals being achieved and the targets which we've set for ourselves being achieved, it means we have a lot of work to do. And this campaign would benefit a lot, because she was there, would benefit a lot from some of the recommendations that were proffered at that meeting. And I believe that some of us here, when we work together, we would be able to pick up where we have challenges to ensure that we work. And I mentioned them, 1, 2, when you talk about 3, 4, 5. So poverty and poverty, hunger and poverty, you are talking about education, health, gender, equality. You go on to 10, which is inequality. And then you add hours, which is corruption, which then affects all of what we are talking about. Because in the space where there is no transparency, which we have heard, when negotiations are done without those who are supposed to be the end beneficiaries being involved, then we realize that at the end of the day, we are being shortchanged, but we do not know. The very few are benefiting from the larger population, and we should all pay attention to this. It's not for nothing that the SDGs actually look at the issues of looking at taxation and also as targets, and looking at how women can benefit specifically. So when you look at the issues around gender equality and tax justice, we see some linkages in this space, and I mentioned some of them. So gender equality and tax justice is a multifaceted and phenomena, and revolves around ensuring that tax policies and systems are fair and do not exacerbate gender disparities. Creating a fair, responsive tax system that reduces income inequality, promotes gender diversity in employment, allocates resources to gender-sensitive services, addresses gender pay gaps, and eliminates tax evasion. But then also ensuring that we promote transparency and accountability in our tax revenue system, so that not a few persons are benefiting, but all of us would ensure that the empowerment we are talking about is achieved. So in this space, we look at issues around progressive taxation to see how the wealthy will pay for the poor. And in that case, we are talking about taxes on incomes, and how we can reduce income inequality through these tax systems. This contributes to gender equality by generating revenue for services that benefit women and the marginalized groups. Again, we talk about gender responsive taxation. We have mentioned some examples. Do we tax sanitary pads? Do we tax women who are in small-scale agriculture? When we are giving incentives to farmers, do we give more to women who are into crop production, food crop and vegetables, perishable commodities? Do we give them some incentives that then will propel them in ensuring that they get the best out of the deals that are proffered? So in our taxation, we look at how gender responsive taxation is. Our policies geared towards ensuring this? If not, then we need to look at it again. We talked about resource allocation a lot, and so I skipped that. And then reducing the gender pay gap as well has been discussed, so I skipped that as well. Then elimination of tax evasion and avoidance. I believe you all agree that when we are able to do this, governments would have adequate resources to then budget and also allocate those resources to programs that benefit women, benefit girls, and all groups at risk of discrimination. And then promoting the issue around accountability and transparency is very important because it will help us all reduce corruption and ensure that taxes that are collected are efficiently and effectively utilized. Bear in mind, the purpose of taxation or the collection of tax is to ensure that we have development. Looking at tax justice and also the issue around inclusive development. A fair tax system can finance essential public services such as healthcare and education. When it is not fair, we continue to hear what we are hearing currently because we have been struck by we continue to justify why we are in this economic quagmire by the fact that it is COVID or it is Russia and Ukraine. We have forgotten that we've not been able to mobilize taxes very well in this country. Various researchers have alluded to the fact, and tax justice has not been one of the key pillars we have looked into. We do things to justify. Somebody actually said, why would we want to look at issues of women and not everybody? And we say that it is important to look at some of these issues because we are talking about inclusion in this space. So let's pay attention to that. A progressive tax system as well promotes higher income individuals paying the larger share of income taxes or of their incomes as taxes. We heard about the Ada Lagoon, where women who were doing their small scale salt winning being their jobs being taken away from them by a bigger firm. How are we bringing these women to benefit from that bigger firm? Are we going to allow them to get their pay from this bigger firm through employment? And how sustainable is that going to be? And so I looked at the issue of the interlinkages from a point of view of the three subjects that I was given to look at: gender equality, tax justice, and then inclusive development. And I make some comparisons here that we should be looking at. So when tax policies, when you talk about equality, we should be considering the impact of our tax policies on gender disparities, which we have all spoken to this morning. Then when we talk about tax justice, in the subject matter, we are talking about ensuring that taxation and they can fund gender-sensitive programs. and we have talked about them here this morning. I don't want to repeat myself. Revenue, when you talk about inclusive development and how it's links to this, then we are saying that revenue used for inclusive development can benefit women and other marginalized groups. And we see policies such as the free education, which is benefiting everybody. We see policies such as social protection, one that is looking at giving health insurance to the very poor households within our communities. And this has shown significant improvement, even though it's not, if you are doing an assessment of the policy, you may not be saying it's a good policy. It's being implemented very well, but these are policies that we should be thinking about, how we strengthen to ensure that we are bringing on board everybody. When we are linking them according to our taxes, we say that we should ensure equal or equitable distribution, not equal, distribution of the tax burden so that everybody is paying. And when everybody pays, today many people get away. I continue to say the tax net is not broadened enough to get everybody on board. It's just to the few who are paid on the government payroll and those who have registered their businesses, who file their tax returns. What about all the others who are not paying or contributing to this? We should pay attention to that. Can we also then reduce the income inequalities? This is novel, it's ideal, but it is doable. We need to see how we can, when we talk about tax justice, we should be able to do that income equality barriers are removed so that everybody then benefits from the system. Otherwise, those who are unequal will continue to be burdened whilst others are benefiting. Those who get all the big reliefs can pay. And yet, I continue to cite the example of people who have connections getting all the tax reliefs. And yet, the Ghanaian middle class person who goes in to buy a second-hand car, when they come, they pay so huge, such huge amounts. Yet we see big businesses getting the tax reliefs free to ride on and gain all the profits. If even it were for local businesses, perhaps we could say that they will employ people, but for those who then repatriate all their profits into their countries, that's not a fair system at all to deal with. Support, when we talk about the inclusive development arena, then we say we support funding for services like healthcare, so that all, and I mentioned again, all the proactive policies and those we are not implementing. How do we get everybody on board so that nobody stays home and says, I'm sick, but I cannot afford hospital or I cannot afford healthcare? Nobody stays at home and says, I do not have money to send my child to school, because there is unequal balance when it comes to the inclusion agenda for the country. Again, we say we should also make it a point that when we pay our taxes, we should be able to have access to jobs equally, everybody in Ghana. Some should not be more equal than others. Then we talk about revenues that can fund other infrastructure to ensure that we are bridging the gap for the issues around inclusion. So in a nutshell, for me, I believe that these three concepts and phenomena are very important and very symbolic. They have a symbolic relationship, but also a practical, nuanced one that we need to pay attention to if we want to drive the issue of inclusion, tax justice, and also the issue around gender equality. We have done a lot, but a lot more still has to be done. And in this project, I believe that one of the things we should be doing is to pay attention to the issues around accountability. And the campaign should center on one of, if not a key pillar, it should be one of the pillars to look at the issue of accountability, both from the lower and the upper level. Accountability to policy when it comes to how policies are shaped and how policies are implemented. At the lower level, we're looking at the MMDAs who do implementation. How do they do this? How are we implementing policies? And in the selection processes, who benefits? And if we are taking taxes and levies from the lower level, how do we do this and who benefits? Are women involved in the decision-making processes? Are women involved in the evaluation processes? And are women involved in the sharing of the spoils? I would want to say that these linkages are very important. We need to look at them, and then we need to document them if we want to succeed in promoting this agenda. Thank you very much for listening.
I think Mary's presentation has deepened the issues that were raised in the earlier presentation by Dr. Yao Graham. And I think that one of the things that she highlighted was actually the household, the importance of the household in terms of its contributions to taxation, and also the implication of the tax regimes for members of households. Then also she emphasized the accountability element and urged NETRIGHT to use that as one of the pillars of its work. I think that as a membership organization, we as NETRIGHT can also benefit from another issue that she raised in terms of really bringing in a range of actors, as Dr. Graham had already mentioned in his presentation. And we are well positioned as NETRIGHT because we are a membership organization and our members are across the length and breadth of Ghana. So we have already a recipe that enables us to do some comparisons in relation to the different locations where women are, where men are, how they interface with the tax regime, who is paying what, who is losing, and who is benefiting. These were all issues that she came up with. So Mary, thank you very much, and I'm sure GII will partner with us to make this project successful and also very rich, as we all want it to be. Another round of applause, please. So we are gradually coming to the end of the program. And at this point, I would like to call on Patricia Akakpo. Hey, before that, I think we've ignored our virtual participants. So let me, are they there? Hello? Zambia? I'm sure they've gone. They realize we've ignored them. I was trying to get the virtual participants to say something. Virtual phone. Hello? Lamnatu, are you there? And those from the other countries in Africa? Hello? Okay, so we'll continue and then maybe they will come in later. Patricia has whispered in my ears that maybe we open up a little for ideas, for contributions, for questions and clarification on the presentation. So the floor is open. And Shabima, once again.
Yes. Yes. Good morning, all present. This is Livlin Kunidras. Oh, afternoon, sorry. This is Livlin Kunidras from the Ghana CSO's platform on the Sustainable Development Goals. When Auntie Mary was speaking, she made mention of accountability, and transparency. I want to take us to the events that happened in New York and then the consequences for countries. Now, the 13% or 12% of SDGs that were on track necessitated a UN call by the UN General Assembly on a rescue plan for the Sustainable Development Goals. And they charged all countries or member states to come up with priority indicators in the SDGs so that we channel our efforts in achieving those SDGs. And by achieving those SDGs, we have synergy. So when you pick one indicator, it should give you some linkages to other indicators that when this particular indicator in focus is achieved, we are going to have ripple effects in other indicators. And the NDPC, together with the Intercoordination Implementation Committee on the SDGs, came up with 5 thematic areas or 5 indicators, which I would want to just highlight as part of this process. The first agenda on the SDG indicators is 16.6, SDG 16.6, which is the development of effective and accountable transparent institutions at all levels. This is one of the priority areas that Ghana is looking at. If you look at all the reports on corruption, transparency, accountability, I think that Ghana ranks one of the highest countries when it comes to corruption, and this has reflected in the prioritization of SDGs in the country. And so for us as NETRIGHT and then civil society, what we'll really encourage is that as we look at the various sectors of our economic development and then our civil society work, we have to prioritize SDG 16. If we work into SDG 16, we are going to achieve about 78 of the SDG targets. Now, the SDG targets are 169. If SDG 16.6 alone is giving us about 78 of the SDG indicators being achieved, then it means that what Auntie Mary really said here is very important. So let us consider that. I'll just highlight the remaining 4 for our information. The next priority target for Ghana is SDG 8.5, which is decent work and employment, especially for women. Then we'll talk about the education, SDG 4.1, ensure that all girls and women have access to education. Then we'll have SDG 6.2, indicator 6.2, which is also on sanitation and then waste management and water resources. Then we'll have 5.7, which is energy. So these are, by way of just information, the new direction that Ghana is going to focus in the next 7 years, and we'll crave everybody's hands on board or on deck so that we can work together to effectively achieve this. Thank you very much.
Let's give a round of applause. And that's how all of us got to attend that New York meeting while sitting in this room. Yes, please. Which other? So right now we're looking for contributions, ideas outside the box, suggestions on moving the campaign forward. Remember, it's a tax campaign, tax justice campaign. So, Molly.
Thank you. So all the speakers, starting from Dr. Graham, mentioned the important issue of connecting the dots and the struggles. So I want to ask, how exactly are we doing that so that we don't just talk about it and walk away and go back into our separate struggles? What are some of the practical ways in which we can link these struggles and build intersectionalities? I would particularly like to hear Dr. Graham's 1, 2, 3 recommendations specifically on that.
And any thoughts?
Myself? After his, then I'll add mine. Yeah, I do have some, but I would like to hear. Okay, so I think that sometimes we have the conversation, because this is not the first time we are talking about intersectionalities, but if the women in mining are doing something tomorrow, we are just going to think, okay, it's for women in mining. It doesn't even concern us at all. We have had conversations about the general consequences of corruption on all the issues we are talking about. But if there is a protest tomorrow on corruption, it doesn't concern us, because, so I think that those of us who are preaching, working to connecting our civil society in general, because we see, we have silos. Somebody will say, I'm working on corruption. Somebody will say, I'm working on sanitary pads. Somebody will say, I'm working on women in mining. But we are saying that as individual movements, as separate movements, we are not as effective as we could be if we connect our struggles and see the linkages and work together. So I think that part of what we need to do is to also help us to understand the actual connection between the struggles. Sometimes maybe we assume that we actually, like in this room, we assume that the people here actually understand the intersectionalities that we are talking about. Maybe they don't. So that is why we walk away and go back into our separate ways of doing things. So I think part of that should be some conversation or education. First of all, we should take personal responsibility for educating ourselves on these things and understanding them. But beyond that, could there also be a platform, a more intentional platform to help us make these connections and understand the issues as a starting point?
Patricia will respond. Yes.
It's a question. So, in Dr. Graham's presentation, he made mention of some injustice tax regime in the informal sector. And in this, in the informal sector, we only find most women are in there. So, what will he recommend to bring sanity to such sector?
Thank you very much. And you're in the media, right? So what can the media also do to bring attention to the issue?
So I think it boils down to education. We have to do a lot of sensitization, calling people that are within the space when it comes to maybe the ministers involved, so that we raise some of these issues we raise the issues for them to respond to. And then before we can even do that, I think we should go on the ground, find out the tolls that some of them they are paying and all that. And then once we are able to do that, then we can get the responses from the relevant authorities. For all you know, the attention hasn't come to it that women are struggling in the market. And perhaps, I think in a way, we would be making some headway in there.
Let's give a round of applause. Any comments? No? Move on. Yes?
I'm from the media. I just also want to add that we need to actually, my name is Patrick from GNA. I want to add that as media people, we need to actually understand the policies around these particular subjects. And so that we'll be able to, when we understand the policies very well, we'll be able to inform and then ask the relevant questions. So I just want to entreat my colleagues that we should also take, we should go the extra mile to understand some of these things. By researching, by learning, by talking to civil society, by talking to the technocrats and all that.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so in sort of a response to the last two speakers, I think I'm really excited about the fact that Ms. Patricia said that the project, the 3-year project, is broken down into 2 studies. So this initiative is essentially going to go into a lot of research and I think field work in understanding the issues more. And I think that would be essential to creating awareness around what's going on. So when they go into the field work and do the research, and they'll also do research on, I think, the campaign and the awareness and the response to that. So I guess in the next few years, we'll really learn a lot about what's going on and see how best we can help, these women. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Let's give ourselves a round of applause.
I think, so Patricia will kind of wrap up, and then Dr. Yao Graham will have the final word, and then we'll close.
Thank you, Auntie Rose. And the issue about intersectionality, I think in my remarks, I did mention that we'll train tax justice champions. And these are some of the issues that we'll explore. We also have other spaces like the Young Feminist Forum and the National Feminist Forum that we also explore intersectionality, because like you said, we may be even mentioning the word without even understanding what it really means. So there are spaces for us to explore its meaning to help us in this campaign that we are embarking on. Thank you all for coming today. And this is the beginning of the journey. As I mentioned earlier, we've already issued the call for expression of interest for the first study, which is looking at the general tax regime from a gender perspective. I think we'll come to some of you or all of us to be part of this journey, and you'll be hearing more of from us very soon. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, going back to, first of all, let me also say, just once again, repeat my hope for the success of this project. Just a quick footnote on the thing about silos, which Maoli raised. I mean, I think it's the nature of the organizational form that NGOs are, because you go out and raise money, and you get the money from the sources that are interested in supporting your work. And necessarily the results framework that you set up have to speak to showing that the objectives that you set are being met. But that, whilst it defines the work, I don't think should be a constraint on who you work with. Because how you define the work also points to who you ought to work with and how you work with them. So if I take the examples that I gave about the potential points of contact with existing areas of policy work and campaign and organizational forms, we can point to examples which are both positive, but also areas of omission. Let me start with an area of omission. In Third World Network Africa, we believe that the trade unions remain extremely important for anybody who wants to campaign. Okay, why this? Because the trade unions are the biggest and the longest existing secular mass membership organizations of citizens who are concerned about improving people's conditions. It is true that they can default to be very narrow, but the truth is, when we have worked with them, it has both pushed them to see the relationship, the importance of reaching beyond the trade union space, and also we have seen the value in their work. The flip side of that is that most CSOs don't even think about the trade unions when we are thinking about CSO actors in the landscape. And the trade unions also suffer that defect. This is a strategic gap, which I think all of us from both sides should work on a constant basis. Whether it's taxation, whether it's gender equality, whether it's economic policy, whether it's employment, whatever you name it. The citizens are organized in unions, and NGOs tend to be more specialist organizations, while the unions are more broad-based. So I think that's a strategic relationship that all of us should begin to pay more attention to. In the same way we talk about the media. When we have worked with the unions, we found that very fruitful. The other thing, of course, is depending on how you frame the issue, you can then see those who are relevant actors. Just to take some examples from our own working experience. When we did some work many, many years ago against structural adjustment, because structural adjustment policies, just like any IMF package, affects every area. Social policy, that's education and health, affects employment, affects taxation, it affects income levels, There's a whole range of people and organizations who can be associated. So when we did SAPRI, we had the teachers unions, we had the nurses association, we had the TUC, we had small businesses, we had the Association of Ghana Industry, we had CSOs working on gender issues, working on anything you name. It was a very big national coalition. And what we then had was that because the nurses, the teachers, and the trade unions have national presence, they took responsibility for being the regional level secretariats for this global structure. So each organization brought its strength into the thing, and also the particular policy clusters that were formed ensure that teachers, nurses, NGOs working on health and education were in those kinds of coalitions. I'm just an example to show how this thing could work. When we were doing on trade policy, for example, we were able to bring trade unions, the Association of Ghana Business, farmers organizations, professional bodies, because they could see the point about how trade policy was going to affect them, both as citizens and in their areas of particular sectional interest. I mean, from this, if we came to this discussion about taxation, it is possible to see this mapping, that if you are going to talk about the impact of, say gender and taxation issues, if you look, for example, at, say, many unions, and I'm including here the teachers, nurses, and so on, they are speaking on some of these issues, but from their particular entry point. So when we are thinking about who to invite to participate, they may not participate every time, every day, from every angle, but the key thing is, how do we try to understand the entry points on the issue that we are working? Once we get that universe of entry points, it's amazing how many people potentially we can bring to the table in relation to various things. Years ago, when we had a campaign against water privatization, which you, Mali, were involved in, eventually we all agreed that the TUC should be the secretariat for the campaign, because every citizen was interested in water. And having the TUC as the secretariat of the campaign, although a lot of NGOs were involved and community groups, the TUC at the center, which has in a way, a structured presence in government policy making, was so important in being able to push, some things, because they could also point to their base. So in the recent pension, the debt restructuring, when the unions came in and said you cannot touch our pensions, it was more important than what the banks were saying. So I think they are just lessons from our history about how we can approach these things. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Yao Graham, for those concluding remarks, which go to affirm for us once again as NETRIGHT that we have stood on the shoulders of Third World Network and become who we are. Because those campaigns that he has alluded to, we piggybacked on them and deepened our understanding and our campaigning against exclusion of women, and rather for the inclusion of women, women's rights, and the promotion of gender equality. Talking about the structure adjustment programs and moving on to the GPRS, I think through our relationship with TWN, we were able to mount a vigorous campaign urging the Kufuor government at the time to understand the GPRS from a gender perspective and to put in place policies that will be favorable to women in order that our needs and concerns can be addressed. In the same vein, many of the other campaigns and advocacy work that we have done as NETRIGHT, this has been the approach, and I think that that relationship between TWN and NETRIGHT will continue in regards to this project, which has actually come about because of our association with TWN. Many of you are involved in aspects of the campaign already, and that is why you were invited to be part of this launch. And we are believing that that commitment will continue. And we as NETRIGHT will also knock on your doors so that this way of working in silos, we can shift from that and become much more inclusive and collaborative in the ways we understand the issues and how we address them. On that note, I would like to say, what's that? You see, I keep forgetting the online participants, but you know why? It's an age issue. So our online participants, we are very happy you could join us. Unfortunately, we didn't engage you too much, but I think that the issues are very clear to you. As members of NETRIGHT and also as members of this project, we are believing that we are in this together and that we will work hard to ensure that we have a very versatile campaign that is insightful, that is inclusive, and that really hits on the doors of those who make policies that affect us in ways that we are not comfortable about. And so going forward, I want to thank you once again. This is the beginning, and we'll continue to engage with you to deepen our understanding and to chart a course for our campaign and our activism. So all of you, we want to thank you, those who have come to participate face to face. We want to thank you for making time, for making inputs, and also making the commitment that through your own work, you are going to be active in this project. Thank you so much. And on that note, I also like to thank Dr. Yao Graham. I want to thank the Secretariat of NETRIGHT. I want to thank my acquired assistants and all of you who have been here to make this a successful launch. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And we have your back.